And Mr. Little.
Thank you very much, Dr. Griesok. One item that is not on the agenda that has just come in from Thursday is the CSI report is completed. And I wanted to give a little synopsis of the report this evening. Due to pending litigation, the report is not going to be given out. But what I am going to do is give the public and council a little synopsis of what the CSI report is, which started back in March. And to give a little background, the new council came on board here January the 6th, and as most people know, there were questions of the daily report, which was done about a year ago, about 13 months ago, and whether or not everything in the daily report was factual. Nobody knew whether it was. You assumed it is. But I was looking into, in January, as council, we discussed this in our first executive session and looked into it. My first action was to sit down with certain personnel and discuss what was in the daily report. And I discussed with the then police secretary her testimony in the daily report on January the 31st. And her discussion with me was different than what was in the daily report. And it was different significantly. So from that one interview on January the 31st, my discussion with her, I contacted our solicitor, Mr. Dice, on how we would go about this if this was different than what was in the daily report. And he recommended CSI, and then we hired CSI, council did, and the ensuing report, the synopsis I have here, I'm going to go over just real briefly. First of all, the one sent, Mr. Little requested CSI to reinvestigate and clarify certain findings of the daily report. That's the in the first paragraph of the report. And that was basically kind of triggered from the interview that I had at the time with the then police secretary from last year. There are three findings, and I'm going to go over these very briefly. Finding number one, access to police CAT entries by fire and EMS personnel was an ongoing problem, which was routinely fixed but never corrected by the then either Lieutenant or Assistant Chief Steve Pascarella. Mr. Pascarella, his designation with the LRTS was called a super user and had maximum security privilege to all client agency data. And that's part of finding number one. Finding number two, Chief Doug Cole did not tamper with citations, and these have to do with citations, allegedly him fixing citations. The citations were written by Officer Mark Savage on October the 8th, 2012, but they were withdrawn by Mr. Savage on October the 11th, 2012. And that's from finding number two. There's more to this, but I'm just giving a synopsis for the public because we mentioned to the public that we would go over this, but at that time, we, meaning the council and everybody up here, did not know that there was pending litigation. The report really doesn't have to be gone over at this time, but this council feels it's an obligation to the public to go over it to some degree, even though there's pending litigation. Still standing with finding number two, these citations seem to have been mishandled during every step of the process. Bullet number one was Sergeants Hainsey and McConnell, who, according to their interviews, routinely handled all citations, did not handle these citations. The then police secretary provided copies of the citations to Steve Pascarella, which is outside the normal handling procedures. And that's the conclusion of finding number two. Finding number three, Monroeville Volunteer Fire Company members did not access police CAD entries for personal reasons. the dispatchers maintained that they logged onto the system at the Monroeville Volunteer Fire Company did so inadvertently or a force of habit through different passwords they used here at the dispatcher station. Those are the three findings that that are in the CSI report. They're a little bit more detailed, but that's all that I'm going to go into it this evening. I talked with Mr. Dice today, and he's not here, but he is requesting counsel not to speak about this because there is pending federal litigation with this, and that the investigation by CSI is completed. And it's up to, in consultation with Mr. Dice, our solicitor, when the federal litigation is at a certain point or whether it's over, that the report, and along with the daily report, which this counsel mentioned that they would give that out also, to compare the two. But since we can't give this out, we're not going to release the daily report either at this time. And that depends on what moves forward with the federal investigation. So that concludes my report for this evening.